The slap landed hard. The sound cut through the entire dining room like a crack of thunder in a silent house. Wine glasses trembled on the long mahogany table. Attendants froze mid-step. Somewhere near the doorway, a man inhaled so sharply it sounded like he swallowed his own breath. Kwon Seo-jun, the most feared mafia boss in Seoul, slowly turned his head. His mother stood before him, her hand still raised, her chest rising and falling with measured calm. Her jade rings caught the chandelier light and scattered it across the ceiling in small, trembling arcs. She didn't look angry. She looked decided. And somehow that was worse. Her voice did not rise. It didn't need to. Apologize to her. Now. Every gangster in the room froze. Every lieutenant who had spent years watching men beg for their lives in dark parking lots. Every bodyguard who had seen Seo-jun reduce grown men to silence with a single glance. Every single one of them stared at the floor and held his breath. Because standing behind Kwon Sa-kwi, in a dress the color of burnt amber, arms folded and chin lifted, is the woman Seo-jun humiliated a while ago. She wasn't shaking. She wasn't crying. She was watching him with a stillness that was somehow more devastating than rage. And Seo-jun realized something in that moment, something cold and unfamiliar that moved through him like ice water. The entire room was waiting to see whether the monster of Seoul could apologize to a woman he tried to humiliate. He had survived assassinations. He had walked out of courtrooms untouched. He had stared down men twice his size without blinking. But right now, standing under his mother's gaze with this woman watching, he felt something he had not felt since childhood. He felt exposed. If you've never watched a powerful man get humbled, stay with the story. And if you like stories where people stand for themselves like Ada did, stick around. Because what happens next will surprise you. Like this video, subscribe, and let's go back to where it all began. Earlier that afternoon, Ada Okafor was simply trying to get through a Tuesday. She had a fabric supplier to meet, a shipment from Lagos sitting in customs, and 3 alterations due by Friday. Her boutique in Itaewon had been open for 4 years, built from nothing, thread by thread, negotiation by negotiation, and she had learned long ago that survival in this city required focus. So she sat in the window seat of the restaurant, her sketches spread before her, a bowl of doenjang jjigae going warm beside her elbow, and she worked. She did not notice the restaurant changed temperature until a waiter appeared at her table with an apology already written across his face. "Miss, I'm so sorry. We may need to." Then the doors opened. There is a specific kind of silence that follows Kwon Seo-jun into a room. Not the silence of awe or admiration. The silence of animals sensing something predatory has entered their space. Tables began to clear. Staff moved like water around a stone. A manager appeared from nowhere, speaking in low, urgent Korean, gesturing people toward the sides. One of Seo-jun's lieutenants, a wide-shouldered man with a flat expression, stepped forward and moved Ada's table without asking. Her fabric sketches caught the edge of her soup bowl. The bowl tipped. Hot liquid spread across 3 weeks of design work in 2 slow, irreversible seconds. Ada stared at the ruined sketches. She looked up at the lieutenant. He was already walking away. She stood slowly. "Excuse me." Her voice was not loud. It carried anyway. The lieutenant paused, looked at her, through her, then continued walking. Seo-jun had not looked at her yet. He was being guided to a table by the manager, buttoning his jacket, scanning the room the way a man scans a room he already owns. Then, as if sensing the small disturbance, his eyes moved to her. He took her in 1 second, maybe less. A woman standing beside a spilled bowl of soup, holding ruined papers, wearing an expression that was calm in a way that was almost confrontational. His voice, when it came, was quiet, conversational, the way cruelty often is when it is comfortable with itself. If you want to eat in peace, choose places within your reach. A few people laughed, that nervous, self-protective laughter of people who need the powerful man in the room to know they are on his side. Ada did not move. She looked at Seo-jun for a long moment. Not with fear. Not with the performance of bravery. With something more unsettling, genuine assessment. As if she were measuring him and finding him smaller than his reputation suggested. Then she said, clearly and without hurry, "If power is the only reason people tolerate you, that's not respect. That's just fear dressed up for dinner." The nervous laughter stopped immediately. The room went so quiet that the chandelier's soft electrical hum became audible. Seo-jun's eyes sharpened. Something moved behind them, not anger, exactly. More like surprise. Like a man who has walked the same road for years and suddenly found an unexpected stone. Then one of his men stepped forward, and Ada gathered what remained of her sketches, left money on the table, and walked out without looking back. She did not know that someone near the window had been recording for the last 30 seconds. By midnight, the video had 400,000 views. By morning, it had broken 2 million. The headlines were not kind to Seo-jun. Underworld boss humiliates foreign businesswoman in Gangnam. Mafia boss's cruelty caught on camera. Who is the woman who talked back? Journalists appeared outside Ada's boutique. Microphones were pushed toward her face when she stepped out for coffee. She walked past all of them with the same expression she had worn in that restaurant, unbothered, unhurried, completely unwilling to perform distress for anyone's camera. Her only public statement was a single line posted to her shop's social media account. "I didn't come to Korea to beg powerful men for their dignity." It was shared 60,000 times by evening. Seo-jun, in his glass office overlooking the Han River, saw the number and said nothing. He had survived worse press. He had survived investigations, attempted coups from inside his own organization, and 2 separate prosecutorial campaigns that had ended in quietly dropped charges. A viral video would pass. Everything passed. Then his phone rang. He looked at the screen. His mother. He let it ring 3 times before answering, not out of disrespect, but because Kwon Sa-kwi was the only person alive who could make him feel the need to compose himself first. "Dinner," she said, without greeting. "Thursday. My estate. 7 o'clock. I have." 7 o'clock, Seo-jun. She hung up. He stared at the phone for a moment, then set it down and returned to his work, telling himself it was nothing. His mother frequently summoned him for dinner. It was normal. It meant nothing. He would spend the next 2 days slowly realizing how wrong he was. Kwon Sa-kwi did not look like someone who had helped build a criminal empire. She looked like a woman who grew orchids and hosted gallery fundraisers, which she also did because she understood that the best kind of power is the kind no one thinks to look for. She had grown up in a 2-room apartment in Incheon, the daughter of a seamstress and a man who disappeared when she was 9. She had learned early that the world did not give dignity. It had to be taken and then defended, inch by inch, every single day. She had raised her son with that understanding, or she had believed she had. The video had changed something in her. Not outrage, she was too old for outrage. What she felt was something quieter and more corrosive: disappointment. Because what she had seen in that footage was not her son exercising power. It was her son performing it. And there was a difference that mattered enormously to her. She made 1 phone call before Thursday. Not to Seo-jun. To Ada Okafor. Ada almost didn't answer. Unknown number, no message. She had been ignoring calls for 4 days. But something made her pick up on the 4th ring. "My name is Kwon Sa-kwi," the woman said. "I believe my son spilled soup on your work. I would like to offer you dinner on Thursday. I hope you'll come." Ada was silent for a moment. "You're his mother." "Yes. That is, unfortunately, something I cannot change. But what I can do is apologize on behalf of my family. And I would like to do that properly." Another silence. Ada looked around her boutique, at the new sketches pinned to the wall, replacements for the ruined ones, drawn in the early hours of the morning, because work was how she processed anger. "Thursday at 7, she said finally. "I'll send a car." "I have my own car." A brief pause. Then, with something that might have been the beginning of a smile, "Of course you do. I'll see you then." Seojun arrived at his mother's estate at 6:55. He had been here 100 times, knew the stone path, the persimmon trees flanking the courtyard, the heavy wooden door that his mother never locked because she believed that truly dangerous things did not need to announce themselves through doors. He walked into the dining room and stopped. Ada Okafor was seated at the head of the table. Not a side chair, not a polite corner position. The head of the table, in the seat his mother reserved for people she respected, with a cup of tea in front of her and an expression that told him she had known he was coming and had decided, in advance, not to be moved by it. Their eyes met across the room. Neither spoke for 3 full seconds. Then his mother appeared from the kitchen doorway, entirely unperturbed, carrying a small dish of banchan like she had not just arranged the social equivalent of a controlled detonation. "Sit down, Seojun." He sat across from Ada, because there was no other chair. Dinner began with the particular, suffocating politeness of a meal where everyone knows a conversation is coming and no one wants to be the one who starts it. His mother asked Ada about the boutique. Ada answered with the ease of someone who genuinely loved the subject. She talked about sourcing Ankara fabric from a supplier in Abuja, about the difficulty of finding Korean tailors who wanted to learn unfamiliar cuts, about the neighborhood in Itaewon where her shop sat, and the way it had changed in 4 years. Seojun said almost nothing. He watched her. She did not look at him often. When she did, it was brief and unafraid, the way you glance at a piece of furniture you've already decided isn't worth rearranging. It was that, specifically that, which finally cracked something loose in him. "You've caused quite a storm," he said quietly, setting down his chopsticks. Ada looked at him. "I think you'll find the storm was already there when I arrived." The video was taken out of context. "Which part?" she said pleasantly. "The part where your man knocked over my table, or the part where you told me to eat somewhere within my reach?" "I was dismissive," she said. "You were dismissive. You looked at me and made a calculation in about 1 second. And the calculation was that I didn't matter enough to inconvenience yourself over." She tilted her head. "That's not out of context." That was the context. Sakui, at the far end of the table, said nothing. She was watching her son with the focused expression of a doctor observing whether a treatment was taking effect. Seojun's jaw tightened. He reached for his wine, and then said something quiet almost under his breath, something about manufactured outrage, social media noise, people looking for reasons to be offended. Sakui stood. The room shifted. She walked around the table slowly, and there was something in her movement, not hurry, not performance, that made the hair rise. She stopped beside her son's chair, looked down at him with eyes that had watched him since the day he was born and knew every version of him, including the ones he hid. And she slapped him. Not a tap. Not a symbolic gesture. A full, open-palmed slap that snapped his head to the side and left a silence in the room so complete that Ada could hear the persimmon trees moving outside in the night wind. Sokui's voice was soft and absolute. "I did not raise a man who humiliates women for sport. I raised someone who knew what it cost to be dismissed, who knew what it felt like to be looked at and found insufficient." She paused. "Apparently I have to remind you." She turned to Ada. The hardness in her face did something complicated. Didn't leave entirely, but rearranged itself into something that looked, quietly, like respect. "Stay," she said. Then she walked out of the dining room and did not return. The silence she left behind had weight. Seojun sat very still, his hand not quite raised to his jaw, the wine glass untouched in front of him. Ada watched him. She wasn't smiling. She wasn't gloating. She was simply present in the way she was always present, without theater, without apology. He reached for the wine, poured a second glass, pushed it across the table toward her without asking. She considered it, then picked it up. "You look different," she said. He glanced at her. "When you walked into that restaurant," she continued, "you looked like someone who had forgotten other people were real." A long pause. "And now?" She studied him. "Now you look like someone who just remembered." Something passed through his expression that he didn't fully manage to hide. He looked down at the table and was quiet for a moment. Most people, he said finally, are afraid of me before I've said a word. I know. It doesn't bother you. It would bother me more to spend energy on it. He looked at her directly then. The way he hadn't permitted himself to look in the restaurant, or when he'd walked in and found her at the table. A real look, not an assessment. Most people haven't met men like you before, she had said in the restaurant. He turned that over now, examining it. Because it wasn't bravado, it was observation. Which meant there were men like him she had already met. Had already survived. Where are you from? He asked. Lagos. Enugu before that. My father's family is Igbo. How long have you been in Seoul? 6 years. He nodded slowly. And you built the boutique yourself? I built everything myself. Not pride in her voice, just fact, the way you state things that simply are true. They sat in that dining room for another hour after his mother left. They did not become friends. They did not resolve anything, or forgive anything. But somewhere in that hour, the architecture of the thing between them shifted from collision to something else, still tense, still unresolved, but oriented differently. Like two people who have stopped trying to win an argument and started becoming curious about the person making it. When Ada left, Seojun walked her to her car. Neither of them acknowledged that he had done it. He watched her drive away through the persimmon trees, then stood in the courtyard for a while in the dark. In the weeks that followed, he kept seeing her. Some of it was coincidence. Seoul has the deceptive quality of a large city that is really a collection of small neighborhoods, and Itaewon was a place his organization had interests in. But some of it was not coincidence, and he knew it, and he stopped pretending otherwise around the third week when he found himself at a market on a Saturday morning for no professional reason whatsoever. She was there, examining bolts of silk with the focused intensity she brought to everything. She looked up when he appeared, registered no surprise, and returned to the fabric. You're following me, she said. I'm shopping. For what? A pause. I haven't decided yet. She turned a bolt of deep blue silk in her hands, held it to the light. Did you know this color was worth more than gold in medieval Europe? Only royalty could afford it. Now it sits in a market in Seoul, and anyone can touch it. She set it down. Power changes. He looked at her. Is that a message? It's a fact. She picked up another bolt. Messages require someone willing to hear them. Their conversations had that quality, layered, slightly combative, neither person quite willing to give the other an easy inch. She challenged his assumptions the way someone challenges a calculation they've already worked out and found wrong. He pushed back with the reflexive defensiveness of a man unaccustomed to being challenged, but underneath that defensiveness was something he was only beginning to identify, the strange, uncomfortable pleasure of a real conversation. She told him once bluntly, "You've spent so long being feared that you've forgotten how to be known. Being known is a liability in my business." Everything real is a liability, she said. That doesn't mean you get rid of it. It means you protect it better. He didn't answer, but he didn't forget it either. It was his investigator who changed things. Seojun had run a background check on Ada 3 weeks after the restaurant. He had done it automatically, the way he did with everyone who entered his orbit, telling himself it was standard procedure. What came back was not what he expected. Over 4 years, Ada Okafor had quietly become something of an informal protector for small immigrant-owned businesses in the Itaewon corridor. She had negotiated with landlords who raised rents without notice. She had helped a Vietnamese family's restaurant survive a code inspection that had all the signatures of a shakedown. She had stood in front of a Chinese-owned electronics shop while a group of men tried to install the particular kind of fear that precedes an extortion arrangement. One of those men had worked for Seojun's organization. His investigator delivered this information with the careful neutrality of a man who had learned not to editorialize in front of his employer. She chased him off, Seojun said. She told him that she had photographs, contacts at 3 newspapers, and nothing to lose. He left. Seojun was quiet for a long time. She didn't know he was mine? No indication of it, sir.
He thought about that.
This woman, with her boutique and her fabric suppliers and her calm, relentless refusal to be moved, she had been pushing back against the edges of his world for years. Not as a crusade. Not for recognition. Just because someone needed to and she was there, and she was capable of it. He found her at her boutique on a Wednesday afternoon. He came alone, without bodyguards, which caused a visible disruption among the 3 customers browsing inside, all of whom found urgent reasons to leave within 90 seconds. Ada watched them go, then looked at him. "You're bad for business." "You've been interfering with my operations," he said. She didn't flinch. She folded a piece of cloth and set it on the counter. "I've been protecting people. From me. From anyone who mistakes fear for permission." He stepped further into the shop. "Do you understand what my organization is capable of?" "Yes," she said simply. "Do you understand what it costs people when organizations like yours go unchecked in neighborhoods like this one?" The question hung between them. He had been asked questions like it before, by prosecutors, by journalists, by rivals positioning their own moral authority against his. It had never once landed the way it landed now, from this woman folding cloth in a boutique in Itaewon, meeting his eyes without a single tremor. "You've been fighting my empire," he said, "without even knowing it belonged to me." "I don't fight empires," she said. "I defend people. There's a difference. Empires are too big to fight. People are small enough to help." He stood there for a moment that stretched longer than he intended. Then he laughed. Softly, genuinely, the way a man laughs when something surprises him into honesty. "I've had enemies for 20 years, he said. "None of them ever said anything that bothered me as much as the things you say." Ada tilted her head slightly. "Maybe your enemies have been too afraid to be honest with you. And you're not afraid." "I'm afraid of things that can actually hurt me," she said.
"Debt.
Losing the shop. My mother getting sick. You," she paused, looked at him directly. "You're only dangerous to people who need something from you. I don't need anything from you." He understood then, really understood, not just intellectually, not as an observation his investigator had delivered. This woman had built her life on a foundation that had nothing to do with him. His power was only power over people who wanted things he controlled. She had constructed herself entirely outside that system. He could not threaten her, because she had nothing she was willing to surrender. He could not buy her because she had decided a long time ago what things were actually worth. He had never met anyone like her. He wasn't entirely sure he'd known such people existed. Sakui visited the boutique on a Thursday, without announcement. Ada looked up from behind the counter, absorbed the arrival without visible reaction, and offered tea. They sat in the small back room where Ada kept her reference books and her finished samples hanging in clear garment bags along one wall. Sakui moved through the space with the attention of someone who has spent a life noticing details that other people miss. She touched the edge of an Ankara silk combination piece hanging near the window, felt the weight of it, and looked at the stitching. "You did this yourself?"
"The design.
"The finishing. My tailor does the main construction." Sakui nodded, set it back, sat down with her tea. They talked for a while about things that had nothing to do with Seoul. Sakui asked about Lagos, about Ada's parents, about what it really cost, to build something in a foreign city without connections or a safety net. Ada answered honestly the way she always did. She talked about the first year, when she'd slept on a friend's floor and eaten one meal a day, and worked 12 hours in a factory job while building her client list at night. She talked about the first time she turned a profit, which had been small enough that she'd cried over it anyway. Sakui listened in the particular way of someone who recognized a story they had already lived in a different language. "You didn't need anyone," Sakui said finally. It wasn't quite a statement, and wasn't quite a question. "I needed a lot of people," Ada said. "Just none of the wrong ones." Sakui was quiet for a moment. Then, "My son has spent his whole adult life being needed. For protection. For permission. For access. It has made him," she paused, chose the word carefully, distorted. "He has confused being necessary with being known. They are not the same thing." Ada wrapped both hands around her tea glass. I know. He's thinking about you, Sakwi said. Constantly, I imagine, though he would rather lose a hand than admit it. I know that too. Sakwi smiled, a real one, brief and a little wry. And Ada looked out through the open backroom curtain at her shop floor, at the bolts of fabric and the half-finished display in the window, and the framed sketch on the wall that had been a gift from a Senegalese customer who'd become something close to a friend. And I think that a man who has lived his whole life being feared needs to first understand what it means to be seen clearly. Before anything else. She glanced back at Sakwi. Right now he's still figuring out that those aren't the same thing. Sakwi nodded slowly. And you have the patience for that? A small pause. Then, carefully, I have the interest for it. Patience is something else. Sakwi stood, straightened her jacket, set her empty glass on the small tray. She looked at Ada with an expression that was several things at once: approval and recognition, and the particular satisfaction of a woman who has spent a lifetime making correct assessments. Good, she said. Patience can be learned. Interest cannot. He came back to the boutique twice more that week. The first time with a question about whether she sourced fabric from a specific supplier he'd heard about, a transparent pretense she accepted without comment. The second time with no pretense at all. He simply arrived, sat in the chair near the window that had become, without either of them announcing it, the chair where he sat, and watched her work. She let him. That was its own kind of statement. On the Friday of that week, he appeared at her boutique door at 8 in the evening as she was locking up. No suit this time. Dark jeans, a gray jacket. He looked, without the trappings of his world arranged around him, like someone who had been carrying a great deal of weight for a very long time and had recently, tentatively, set some of it down. There's a pojangmaka on the corner of Noxapiang, he said. Good Sunday. I don't know if you've been. Ada pulled her keys from the lock. Turned. Street food. Plastic chairs. Paper cups. He paused. They know me there, but not because they're afraid of me. I used to buy fish cake from the grandmother who ran it when I was 19 and I had nothing. Something shifted in his expression, the briefest loosening of something long held. I don't tell people that. She looked at him for a moment. Let's go, she said. The stall was everything he had described, and smaller. A red and yellow awning fluttering in the October wind. Low stools around a shared table. The smell of broth and sesame and charcoal. An old woman behind the counter who looked up when Seojun appeared and broke into the unhurried smile of someone who had known a person before they became what they became. They ate sitting across from each other with paper cups of soup and a shared plate of sundae, and tteokbokki going warm between them. Around them, the ordinary sounds of an ordinary Friday night. Distant traffic, someone's phone playing music 3 stalls down, the raised voices of 2 friends arguing about something that didn't matter. Ada looked at him across the small table and thought about the distance between this and a chandelier-lit restaurant, between the man who had looked through her and this one, who could not seem to stop looking at her. You look different, she said. Outside all of it. He looked up. Outside what? Your empire. The bodyguards. The silence that follows you into rooms. He was quiet for a moment. How do I look? She considered. Younger. More like a person. Something moved through his expression. He looked down at his cup, back at her. I've been trying to remember the last time I sat somewhere like this with someone who wasn't afraid of what I'd think. And I can't. They ate in silence for a little while. Comfortable silence, which was its own strange achievement between 2 people who had met in collision and spent weeks in verbal sparring. The old woman brought them more broth without being asked and patted Seojun's shoulder as she passed, and he received it with a quietness that told Ada this unremarkable gesture from an old woman at a street stall was something he had been storing carefully for a long time. He set down his chopsticks. I think I'm in trouble, he said. Ada raised an eyebrow. He looked at her. Directly. Honestly. In a way that cost him something, She could tell because it required him to be undefended, and Kwon Seo-jun had spent 20 years making sure he was never undefended. Because I'm starting to care about the opinion of the only woman in Seoul who refuses to have one she doesn't mean. Ada set down her cup, looked at him for a long moment across the paper cups and the leftover tteokbokki and the October wind coming off the street. Then she smiled. Not the restrained, measuring expression she wore when she was assessing something. A real smile, with warmth in it, the kind that told him she had been waiting, not for him, specifically, but for a version of him that actually showed up. Good, she said. Because the version of you that came into that restaurant would have bored me completely. He laughed. Quietly, and without armor. So what happens now? He asked. She picked up her cup. Now you find out what it's like when someone knows who you are and isn't going anywhere.
She paused.
And you find out whether you can handle that. Can I? She looked at him, at this man who had been feared for so long he had nearly forgotten what it felt like to be met, and who was sitting right now on a plastic stool under a red and yellow awning looking at her like she was the most disorienting and necessary thing that had happened to him in years. I think, she said, you might surprise yourself. Fade out. If this story moved you, hit the like button. Subscribe so you never miss what comes next. And drop a comment, tell me, who do you think changed more? Seo-jun, the man who learned what power can't buy? Or Ada, who sat down at a stranger's table and stayed? I read every single one. Thanks for watching. See you in the next one.